I'm Julianne Luce, and you're listening to episode 14 of the Parent Forward podcast. This is a podcast for the parent who knows there's more going on beneath the surface and wants to understand it. Around here, we talk about parenting and spiritual formation, how your life with God, your story, and who you're becoming shapes the way you show up with your kids. I'm a kids ministry director, a parent coach, and a spiritual director. But more than anything, I'm a mom, a parent, right in the middle of it with you. And today's episode is going to feel a little different. I'm really glad you're here. So if you've been listening from the beginning, first of all, thank you. You may have noticed there have been some gaps in my episodes, and I wanted to take a moment to tell you why and invite you into the story a little bit. There's been a lot that has happened in my life since last August, and this space doesn't always show the behind the scenes, everyday life of a person sitting behind the microphone. And while I never want this podcast to be about me, it's always been about coming alongside you, the parent, the listener. I felt this nudge to share more of my own story. My spiritual director keeps reminding me this is part of the gift, that our stories, when offered honestly, become a way of connecting. And there's this little line from David Benner, the author of The Gift of Being Yourself. He writes that knowing God and knowing ourselves are deeply connected, that we don't grow very far in one without the other. And that has been shaping me in a deeper way lately. And the work God does in us is never just for us. It becomes something we carry into every room, every relationship, every conversation. And that includes this one right here. What you're learning from me on this podcast, it's not just thoughts and strategies. It's actually a lens shaped by my story, the places I've been, and by the work God has been doing in me over time. So today, I want to let you see a little more of what has shaped me. This episode is going to look a little different. It's going to be a little bit longer than usual. It's going to feel a little bit more like story time with Jules. And my hope truly is that you feel like you know me just a little bit more, so you can better understand the lens I'm seeing parenting and spiritual formation through. So I want you to imagine this. You've come over to my little farmhouse. You're sitting at my dinged up farmhouse table. There's hot coffee in your hands, maybe something sweet on the table between us. And I'm just looking at you and saying, let me tell you where I've been, because it's shaped everything I'm about to say to you moving forward. Ever since August of last year, my life has shifted in some really big ways. I sent a child to college, I put another behind the wheel, and my baby is now in middle school. Gosh, leaving those elementary years behind, that was rougher than I thought. But at the same time, for the first time in my life, I've also stepped into full-time work outside the home. I am a kids ministry director now. I walk with parents and children every single week. And so through all of that, it has kind of just made me stop in the early months of this year. At the beginning of this year, there were two words I felt drawn to. Do you ever do that? Choose a word for the year? It felt like an invitation. And the two words that kept surfacing were resilience and reflection, or maybe even remembering. The looking back and reflecting, that's already been doing something incredible in me. Around the same time that I chose those words, I was listening to an episode from Emily P. Freeman, episode 382 of The Next Right Thing, and it felt like a mirror to my life. She talks about how we are always walking out of rooms and into new ones. And I remember thinking, yes, that's exactly what this season feels like. New rooms, new spaces, and this quiet question underneath it all. How do I want to walk into them? And who am I becoming as I do? She offers a simple reset list for your soul. Questions like, what is ending and what is beginning? What brings me back to myself? What brings connection with God? What are my non-negotiables in this season? Now, I won't unpack all of those here, but they have become an invitation for me to reflect. And that remembering has been really grounding. I think you should go check out that episode. So I want to take you back a bit through earlier parts of my life that has led up to me releasing this podcast. When I was little, I was the rule follower. Not just a little bit. I mean, I built my whole world around it. I believed if I did all the right things, everything around me would stay okay. I didn't know Jesus yet, but I knew about Santa Claus. And I'm serious, guys. I was kind of obsessed with Santa Claus. And that whole idea of a list of being watched, of being sorted into naughty and nice, that made perfect sense to me. So I lived like that. And I tried so hard to be good and gooder and goodest, to be good enough to keep things from falling apart around me. And to be honest, and I will share more about this in future episodes, things really did seem to fall apart around me and my family. And I thought somehow me being so good would make everything else run smoothly. But one day, like many young kids, I found out that all of that Santa Claus stuff wasn't real. And that's kind of when something shifted in me. This system that I have been trusting with everything, it doesn't actually hold up. Even as a kid, I think I started to wonder, if rules don't change things, what does? Now, that next little part of my story, I'm actually going to share in future episodes of me becoming a Christian, but I want to fast forward to college, where I became a Christian. I started growing in my faith, and I started in child psychology and elementary education as my major. And during my practicums, I kept getting pulled towards the kids, the ones labeled as behind, the ones already written off as non-readers by third grade. And I remember sitting with another student teacher out in the hallway. We had all the hard kids. And we started asking each other, what if they actually can learn? They just don't believe they can. And so we tried something. We launched a little experiment amongst ourselves. We decided that we would stop correcting everything. We would stop reinforcing what they couldn't do. We gave ourselves a rule that we could only name what we could see that was positive in them. You would hear us say things like, you figured that out. You stayed with that. You're closer than you think. I can still picture one of those boys, how he used to slump in his chair and barely look up. And by the end of the semester, he was reading out loud and confidently. I remember a young girl telling me that her mom couldn't read very well and her older siblings wouldn't support her in her reading. I remember by the end of that semester, that girl feeling like she could go help her own mom read because of her ability. It was phenomenal to see a smile on her face and to see the self-pride in understanding things that she thought she wasn't capable of understanding. And I remember thinking, this is a bigger idea than just reading. This is about identity. This is about who they think they are and who they think they can become. So that's a whole nother story of how I decided I wasn't going to be a classroom teacher and needed to go into special education, but did not want to spend 3 more years in college. So somewhere along the way, I ended up in journalism. And honestly, guys, it made perfect sense because I had already been doing that my whole life. I loved writing. I had always won Young Author Awards. I'd always wanted to investigate the story. I loved watching people, asking questions, trying to understand what's underneath. And I remember one day driving to class, and there was this man on the side of the road, a hitchhiker. Now, by this time, I was a married college student, and my husband had one rule for me. Literally, I don't know why this was the one rule. Probably because he knew I might consider it. He said, do not pick up a hitchhiker, especially if you are alone. But guys, I had seen this man before multiple times. He seemed harmless. He did not seem like a serial killer. And I just had this thought, he has a story. So I pulled over and he got in the car and we started talking. And he told me about the accident. Driving an oil tanker that stalled on a train track, getting hit, nearly losing his life, years of recovery. He actually had brought newspaper clippings that he could show me. And then he told me about him choosing to hitchhike, not because he had to, but he did this daily because he wanted to meet people. He had stories from all over the country, diplomats, famous people, athletes. And I remember sitting there thinking, people carry so much more than we can see. That story, written about that man, it was called Walking in the Rain, Thumbing for a Ride. It won me a first place Golden Leaf Award, and I was so proud. But more than that, it reinforced something in me to pay attention. There's always something more underneath. Now, I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore, just so you know. But fast forward to I got out of college, I was working in the news and I was loving it. But we decided to start a family. I decided to walk away from that world because I wanted to give my kids something I didn't have. A mom at home. And I don't say that lightly because it was a real cost. I loved that work, but I chose a different kind of work. And guys, I've never regretted it. Not once. And don't get me wrong, it was a sacrifice to have a one income family married to a youth pastor, but we made it work and it was a beautiful choice. And it didn't change me. I didn't stop being who I was, a teacher, a researcher, a journalist, investigator, a scientist. I just became a different kind of scientist. I started studying my kids and parenting. Okay, so another fast forward, we decided to join a team and become church planters in Boulder, Colorado. This was a crazy adventure that God was bringing us on. And there was this moment in Boulder, we had Korean neighbors, South Korean, who didn't speak much English. And somehow they thought through broken English that I was a teacher, which I wasn't. And they asked me to come to this apartment, I remember, on Mother's Day. So I walk into this housing for students, grad students at CU. And in this building, it was mostly South Korean families. And the fathers were all professors, either here or professors in South Korea, learning something for 2 years before they head back to their country. So I walk in and I sit down on the floor with these Korean parents. And one by one, these parents come in and out interviewing me. And I kept trying to explain to them, I'm actually not a teacher. I'm a journalist. And they said, oh, even better. They wanted their kids to learn to read and write and speak English well, but they also wanted their kids to learn creativity, knowing they were headed back to South Korea where they don't teach a lot of creative arts. Towards the end of these meetings where I was like, this is fantastic. This is great. I would love to reach out and do this. That's great. They said, let's talk about tuition. And I was like, oh, no. I will just do this for fun. This is kind of exciting, and they were offended. So they paid me. It was a real job. I am embarrassed to admit how much they paid me. I tried to bargain them down, but their feelings were getting hurt. So they paid me ridiculously well. And so then I began teaching English to Koreans, and I did not know a lick of Korean. And then I started teaching writing and creative writing and then speaking and more subjects. And before I knew it, this was like a whole ridiculous business. Families coming and going, recommending me to the next family. And again, I thought, how did I end up here? But also, this is what I do. I step into stories and God does some fun things. Okay, so a little bit later, we moved from Colorado and we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska. I am involved in the women's ministry and I kept noticing something. We had women who just loved God deeply. They were the most disciplined, most consistent, most faithful women in their walk. And still, what was a conundrum to me was that many of them I felt were unable to be honest about their true struggles. They were unable to be completely vulnerable, not just with people, but with God. They were the most loving and serving women, but unable to have compassion for themselves. Even though these women would wake up at the crack of dawn to do Bible study, they would not know what to do when their life actually broke open. And I remember thinking, we're missing something. Have we hit a ceiling? So that leads into the next story, which is I found myself at this conference in Wichita, Kansas. Now, that is a long story in itself. The whole COVID thing. My husband had signed us up for a conference during COVID that got canceled and then rescheduled in 2021. And I found myself at this university in Wichita by myself because my husband had to preach that weekend. And it was called Friends University. And I thought, this is crazy. It's a quaint little place. And I'm like, how did you copyright the name Friends University? It's nuts. So Friends University comes out of the Quaker tradition. So which, if you're not familiar, it's a branch of Christianity that really emphasizes on stillness and simplicity and listening for God's presence, not just talking to him, but talking with him. And at one point, I walk into this building, we're all wearing masks at this point, and just thinking, wow, I'm here at Friends University and all these people seem like they are friends with each other. It's a beautiful community and I wanted more of it. And every speaker on stage was like, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I've been thinking all along. I just haven't heard someone preach it from the stage, and say it to each other. I was just thinking it in my mind. And at one point, a speaker said, okay, I want you to hold out your hands and tell God what you want. And I didn't really want to do that. I thought, God already knows what I want, but everybody's doing it. So behind my black cloth mask fuming, I lay my hands out and I say, okay, God, you already know this, but I want so badly for my dad to get saved, which seems like impossible because every time I try to tell him about my faith, it goes horribly wrong. And one more thing. The second thing I want to do something crazy with you. I want to make waves. I want to change up the status quo. I just want to do something crazy together, and I want it to stick. And that was it. And you know what? After that, nothing dramatic happened. No glitter fell from the sky. No like fanfare parade or anything. But something kind of settled in me. Like, I think God's actually listening to this. I think he might really be up to something. So all that started to stir. I had a long drive home. I remember coming home and talking to my husband, and I said, I had the most transformative time, and I feel like God is calling me to go back to school, to grad school, to Friends University, to get a degree in Christian spiritual formation and leadership. I'm so certain. And he was like, well, babe, guys, he's the breadwinner of the family. I'm the stay-at-home mom. Sure, I have these side gigs and side jobs I do, but really we live off of his income. And if anyone's going to go back to school, it's going to be him. And I remember like a teenager kind of throwing a tantrum saying, that's not fair. You don't even like to take classes. Can I just take the classes for you? Can I write all your papers? And I know what you're thinking, like, yeah, who wouldn't take me up on that, right? Like who would not love somebody asking them if they could just do all their work for them? But he is an honest man. And he said, no, babe, I actually do want to learn. And I said, I know, but you're just a slow learner. So you're going to take like one class a year and it's going to take 20 years. And yes, I actually said that and I'm embarrassed, but I just thought I would admit to you I'm human and was really frustrated. So that dream or whatever I thought God was calling me to at that time, it didn't come to fruition. But what's crazy, guys, is fast forward to February of 2022, and I find myself in a predicament with my dad in the hospital, in a coma, unresponsive for a week. And I remember having a really hard time trusting God and all the prayers that I prayed for over 20 years for my dad. So we knew we were going to have to let him go. We knew we were going to have to turn off the machines. And then the day before we were going to do that, he woke up. And that night he said yes to Jesus. And after years of me trying to talk to him, he accepted Christ. And the next day he passed away. And I stood there thinking, God, you were working this whole time in ways I could not see. I could only trust. After my dad passed away, I had a little bit of inheritance money. And I was able to go to school and go to that program at Friends University. And that is the moment that changed the trajectory of my life. I studied spiritual formation, and for the first time, everything that I had been noticing for years in Christian life, in parenting, in motherhood, it all had a language. It had a framework and clarity, and I realized that this is what I've been trying to name all along. So now, I graduated in 2024 and I started this podcast and I started spiritual direction and I became a kids ministry director. And now I sit here in this really unique place. I've lived in the home. I've led in ministry. I've built things. I'll tell you more stories about those in the future episodes. I've studied so deeply. I've walked through loss and grief and confusion and trauma. And I'm still in it, still parenting, still learning, and still being formed. And I wanted to tell you all of this because I realized that I think I get misunderstood quite often. I wonder if I don't always look like that on the outside, like I'm still being formed, or that I've even been through it. I think sometimes people see me and think, oh, she's safe. Oh, she's simple. Oh, she's a pastor's wife. Oh, she's a nice Christian girl. Oh, she couldn't hurt a fly. But there's more to my story than that. And that's part of why I talk the way I do. So if you're here, this is what I want you to know. I'm not going to give you a formula for parenting, but I will help you see what's actually shaping your parenting because I've spent a lifetime learning how to notice that. And honestly, thank you for listening. I just wanted you to know a little more today because there's a real person behind this microphone, and I just care a ridiculous amount about you, the one listening. So if you're still here with me, I'm really glad you are. And if any part of my story has felt familiar to you, I would really love to hear about that. Before you go, if this podcast has been meaningful to you, would you take a second to follow it and leave a review? I really want to try to grow this year, and that's one of the biggest ways that you can help me to do that. I'd like to give you a virtual hug as a thank you. I'm hugging you right now. I'd also love to connect with you outside of this. So you can find me on Instagram at Julie Luce or at Parent Forward Podcast. That's where I tend to keep these conversations going, and I try to show up. If you've ever wanted to reach out to me more personally, you sure could. You could email me. I think I put the email in the show notes, or you can DM me on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, friend, keep parenting forward, one faithful step at a time.